never believed in any of those haunted ride stories. Every theme park has them. Some old, abandoned attraction with rumors of freak accidents, unexplained malfunctions, or worse. Usually, it's just bored employees trying to spook the new hires. That's what I thought about the rumors surrounding the Titan, an old roller coaster in the back of the park that had been shut down for years after a fatal accident. But when management decided they wanted to reopen it, I was the unlucky guy assigned to inspect it. I work maintenance, been here for 5 years. I know every bolt and wire in this place, and I've seen my fair share of weird shit. But nothing like what happened with the Titan. The official story was that a ride operator died during a routine test run. Something about a lap bar failure. There were a ton of safety violations, lawsuits, and eventually they shut the ride down indefinitely. But that didn't stop the rumors. Employees said they saw figures on the security feeds, heard the clanking of the ride cycling on its own at night, felt cold spots near the boarding platform. All the usual creepy amusement park nonsense. Still, it didn't explain why the company suddenly wanted to reopen it. My boss told me the higher-ups had done extensive safety evaluations, but we needed to confirm everything was functional before bringing in test riders. That meant I started my inspections during the day. The Titan was old, sure, but nothing I couldn't handle. The hydraulics needed replacing, the track had some rust buildup, and the electrical system was outdated. All fixable. But one thing kept bothering me. There was a safety sensor that would trigger an error every single time at the same exact spot on the track, right before the second drop. I reset the system, replaced the sensor, and ran a test cycle. Same error. I did it again. Same error. No explanation. I started digging through old maintenance records to see if this was a known issue before the shutdown. That's when I found something chilling. The reports from the night of the fatal accident showed that the exact same sensor had triggered an error just before the operator was killed. No one had ever figured out why. The ride had been shut down before they could investigate further. I told myself it had to be a mechanical issue. A wiring fault, maybe. It had to be. I wasn't about to start believing in ghosts just because some glitch lined up with a tragic accident from years ago. I needed to prove it to myself. So I made a stupid decision. I rode the damn thing. I waited until after hours when the park was empty. My logic was simple. If I could go through the full ride without anything happening, then the malfunction was just that. A glitch. Nothing more. I locked myself into the front seat, double-checked my lap bar, paranoia kicking in, and gave the signal. The Titan jerked to life, climbing the first hill with that old, familiar clatter of chains pulling it upward. Everything seemed normal. The first drop was smooth. The turns were fine. But then we hit the second drop. The exact spot where the sensor always failed. I felt it before I even saw it. The lap bar clicked loose. Panic shot through me as I slammed my arms down, trying to hold it in place. The ride suddenly sped up, way faster than it was supposed to go. I gritted my teeth, holding onto the seat with everything I had. If I let go, I was dead. The coaster whipped through the next few turns, each one threatening to throw me out of my seat. I don't know how, but I made it to the end. As the train screeched to a stop, I tumbled out onto the platform, gasping for air. What the hell just happened? Shaking, I ran back to the control panel. There was no record of a speed increase. No sign of tampering. It didn't make sense. Then I saw it. A printed report sitting neatly on my desk. One I hadn't seen before. It was a test log. From the night before. Someone had run the Titan after hours. But according to the report, no one had ever gotten off. I quit the next day. I took a summer job at Redacted Amusement Park because it paid better than my usual gigs, and I figured, why not? Free rides, free food, and easy money. The park was massive, practically a city on its own, so getting lost on my first day wasn't surprising. What was surprising was how easily I found myself in a place I shouldn't have been. I was supposed to be on my way to the employee break room, but after taking what I thought was a shortcut, I ended up in a service hallway that didn't match anything I had seen during training. No bright park colors, no cartoon mascots on the walls, just gray cinder blocks and flickering fluorescent lights. It smelled damp, like old metal and something faintly rotten. I figured I had to be close to a maintenance area, so I kept going. The hallway sloped downward slightly, and before I knew it, I was staring at a heavy, industrial-style door. It was slightly open, and a faint draft made it creak against the hinges. Something about it made my stomach tighten. Felt wrong. Pushed it open. Inside was a tunnel. Not some small utility space, but a whole underground network. The air was cold and stale, and the walls were lined with pipes and old electrical panels. The further I walked, the weirder it got. There were rusted lockers with employee names stenciled on them. Some names were scratched out completely. Old uniforms hung from hooks, stiff with age. A clipboard sat on a metal table, its pages yellowed and curling at the edges. I picked it up and read the first few names. Most of them had quit scrawled in red ink next to them. Some had dates, months, years old. But then I noticed the last name on the list. The quit date was last week. I suddenly felt sick. I didn't know the name, but it was fresh. Someone had worked here last week and now they were gone? Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Not like someone passing by, like someone searching. I panicked and slipped behind a row of lockers, pressing myself against the cold metal. From the shadows, I could just barely see a security guard walking past. But he wasn't alone. He was escorting an employee, a guy in the same uniform I was wearing. But something was wrong. The way the guy was looking around, his posture, it was like he was terrified. They passed by without noticing me, but I stayed frozen for a long time after they were gone. My heart was hammering in my chest. When I finally forced myself to move, I put the clipboard back where I found it and got the hell out of there. The next morning, my employee ID didn't work. I couldn't clock in, couldn't access the system. When I checked the roster, my name was gone. No, worse than gone. I found another clipboard at the front desk, one of the usual employee lists. My name was on it, listed under quit. I hadn't quit. I hadn't even spoken to a manager. I tried to explain it to my supervisor, but he just looked confused, like he didn't recognize me at all. He told me if I wasn't an employee, I needed to leave park property immediately. I felt eyes on me as I walked out. I knew security was watching, waiting. I didn't go home. I didn't even go back to my car. I left everything behind and walked straight out of the park, out past the parking lot, past the nearby stores. I took the first bus I saw and rode it until I felt safe enough to breathe. That was a month ago. I still don't know what I saw in those tunnels. I don't know what happened to that employee. I used to work at a small amusement park in my town, one of those seasonal places that only opened in the summer and shut down right after Labor Day. It wasn't much, just a few carnival rides, some food stalls, and one of those old Ferris wheels with the rickety metal carriages that creaked whenever they moved. I started working there right after high school, mostly running the Ferris wheel, and after a few seasons, I knew that ride better than anyone. One night, toward the end of summer, I was the last one closing up. Everyone else had already left, but I stuck around to finish some paperwork in the tiny ride operator's booth near the Ferris wheel. When I finally stepped out, I noticed something strange. The wheel was still moving. Now, the Ferris wheel was old and loud. If it had been running, I would have heard it long before. But it was dead silent, the lights off, the whole park dark except for the dim glow of the security lights along the walkways. Yet, there it was, slowly turning as if someone had left it on. I figured someone must have messed up shutting it down, so I sighed and walked over to the control panel. The main switch was already in the off position. I flipped it back and forth a couple of times just to be sure, but nothing changed. The wheel kept turning. That's when I noticed something lying on the ground near the base of the ride. A walkie-talkie. We all used them at work, but I hadn't been using mine that night. I picked it up and pressed the button. "Hey, this is Ben. Anyone still here?" Silence. Then, a faint, crackling voice. "Still here. Still here. Help me." I froze. The voice was distant, weak, like it was coming from somewhere far away, barely pushing through the static. I looked around the park, expecting to see one of my coworkers messing with me, but the place was empty. The security guys usually did their rounds around this time, so I thought maybe one of them had dropped their radio. I pressed the button again. Who is this? More static. Then, still here. A chill ran down my spine. I decided to do a quick walk around the park to see if anyone had stayed behind. Maybe some kids had snuck in, or maybe one of the guys had left their radio on by accident. But after checking the entire area, I found nothing. The Ferris wheel was still moving. At this point, I was officially creeped out. I walked back to the operator's booth, trying to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe it was just some weird electrical glitch. Maybe someone had programmed a timed rotation, and I hadn't noticed. The next day, I brought it up to my coworkers during our morning meeting. I expected them to laugh, tell me it was just a power issue, or maybe an old radio signal bouncing around. But instead, they went quiet. One of the older guys, Mark, looked pale. "Where did you find that walkie?" he asked. "Near the Ferris wheel," I said, confused. "Why?" He glanced at the others, like he was debating whether to say something. "There used to be a guy who worked here. He ran the Ferris wheel just like you. One night, he stayed late just like you did. The next morning, he was gone. Just vanished." I laughed, assuming it was some urban legend they told new employees. "Okay, sure. And let me guess, the walkie-talkie belonged to him." Mark didn't laugh. "They never found it." I felt a little uneasy but brushed it off. People disappeared all the time, right? Maybe the guy just skipped town, quit without notice. That night, I stayed late again. I told myself it was just to prove that nothing weird was happening, that it was all in my head. But deep down, I think I wanted to see if the Ferris wheel would start moving again. It did. I watched it from a distance, my stomach twisting. Then my walkie, my own, the one clipped to my belt, crackled to life. Still here, the same voice, but this time it was clearer, closer. I turned and ran straight to the employee records office. If this was some prank, I wanted to know exactly who had worked here before me. I logged into the system, scrolling through past employee files, and then I saw it. My name, Ben Carter, listed under missing. Last seen, August 19th, 2017. I stared at the screen, my heartbeat hammering in my chest. That wasn't possible. I was right there. I had clocked in that morning. I was standing in the damn office, reading my own file. I grabbed my employee ID and ran to the security office. The guards were sitting inside, watching the monitors. I pounded on the door. "Guys, something's wrong with the records. My name is listed under missing persons." "That's a mistake, right?" One of them stood up, looking at me like I was a stranger. "Who are you?" I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "What do you mean?" "It's me, Ben. I've worked here for years." The other guard exchanged a glance with his coworker. "We don't have a Ben working here." I pulled out my ID, shoving it toward them. "Then what's this?" The first guard took it, flipping it over. He frowned. "This ID number isn't in the system." I felt sick. Behind me, through the window, I could see the Ferris wheel turning. It was supposed to be a fun night. One last trip to the park before it shut down for the season. Lena had managed to get discounted tickets, so she, Mia, Josh, and I decided to go. We spent the whole day hitting up the biggest rides, stuffing ourselves with overpriced food, and laughing way too much at the ridiculous haunted house. By the time the announcement came over the speakers that the park would be closing soon, we were exhausted but happy. That's when we saw him, a park worker standing by the entrance to one of the biggest coasters. The line had been closed off and people were walking away, disappointed. But as we passed, he made eye contact with Lena and tilted his head toward the ride. "Want to go one last time?" he asked. We all looked at each other. The ride was a beast, crazy fast with a near-vertical drop that made your stomach feel like it was floating. The idea of ending the night with one last thrill was tempting. "Hell yeah," Josh said before any of us could think too hard about it. The worker unhooked the chain and waved us through. No one else was around. just us. As we climbed into our seats, I noticed something weird. The usual banter from the workers wasn't there. No safety reminders, no last checks. Just the guy pulling down our restraints, locking them in place, and stepping back without a word. Then the ride started moving. First, everything was normal. The slow click, click, click of the chain lift, the distant hum of the park's closing music. We reached the peak, and for a split second, I took in the view of the city lights twinkling in the distance before we plummeted down at full speed. Then, midway through, everything stopped. And I don't mean a gradual slowdown. I mean a full, jarring stop, like someone had yanked an emergency brake. We were at the highest part of the ride, the track dipping down into a steep drop just ahead. At first, we all laughed, assuming it was a temporary glitch. But then the laughter died out. No announcement came over the speakers. No backup lights flickered on. It was just silent. "Okay, what the hell?" Mia muttered. We fumbled for our phones. No service. Not even a single bar. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 15. My legs were starting to cramp. The air was cooling down, and the night was eerily quiet. Too quiet. The usual sounds of the park, distant chatter, music, ride mechanisms were gone. It was like we were the only ones left. Then, without warning, our restraints unlocked. All at once. No beeping, no voice telling us it was safe to move. Just a soft click, and suddenly we weren't secured anymore. For a second, none of us moved. Then Josh whispered, "We need to get down." The only way was the narrow maintenance ladder attached to the side of the track. We had no idea if the ride would start back up suddenly, so staying put wasn't an option. One by one, we climbed down, my hands gripping the cold metal bars so tightly my fingers ached. When we finally reached the ground, relief flooded me. But then, I noticed something. The park was empty. Not just closing time empty. Abandoned. No workers. No guests. No distant sounds of janitors cleaning up or maintenance guys shutting things down. Every light was off. Every stall, every food stand, completely deserted. The air smelled stale, like the place had been abandoned for years. Lena ran toward the main path. "Let's just get to the exit." We followed, picking up speed as unease settled into our chests. When we reached the entrance gates, our hearts sank. Locked, heavy chains wrapped around them. "This doesn't make sense," Mia whispered. "The guy let us on. He had to be here." But as we looked around, it was clear we were alone. Then, out of nowhere, the floodlights snapped on, blindingly bright. A voice rang out. "Hey, what are you doing in here?" We spun around. A security guard was jogging toward us, his face twisted in confusion and irritation. "The park is closed," he snapped. Relief flooded through me. "Thank God. Listen, we got stuck on the coaster. Some worker let us on, but it broke down. We had to climb down." "What are you talking about?" His brow furrowed. I gestured back toward the ride. "We were just up there." His expression changed. Not anger, not annoyance. Something else. Something that made my stomach drop. "The last ride of the night was 3 hours ago," he said slowly. "No one else has been in the park since." For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Josh let out a nervous chuckle. "No, man, we literally I just finished my rounds." The guard interrupted. "No one was on that ride. No one's been here. The entrance has been locked since closing." We turned, looking back at the towering coaster. The cars were still parked at the loading station, restraints open, empty. No worker in sight. No sign we had ever been up there at all. I don't remember much after that. Just the guard leading us through the employee exit, the quiet drive home, the sick feeling in my gut. We never found out who that worker was, how we got on that ride, or how the hell 3 hours disappeared. But every time I hear someone mention that park, I wonder if someone else will take the offer. One last ride before closing, and if they'll ever make it out. There's an old amusement park on the outskirts of my city. It was originally shut down years ago after a pretty bad accident on one of the rides. A kid died, a few others were injured, and the place never really recovered. A few years back, some investors tried to bring it back to life. New rides, a fresh coat of paint, the whole thing. And it worked, sort of. Families started coming again. But there was always this one section that remained off-limits, completely fenced off from the rest of the park. It was the original part of the park, left to rot. I'd always been curious about it, especially since I had seen old photos online of how it used to look. So one night, I decided to check it out. I waited until after dark, when the park had closed, and snuck in through a gap in the fence. The main park still had security, but I doubted they paid much attention to this part. Nobody came here anymore. The second I stepped inside, I could tell the air was different, thicker, almost stale. It smelled like dust, rust, and something else I couldn't quite place. Old posters were peeling off the walls, and the paint on the ticket booths was cracked and faded. I started moving deeper inside. The main attraction of this section was an old carousel, half hidden behind a row of abandoned concession stands. Its colors had long since faded, and the wooden horses were chipped and cracked, their painted eyes dull and lifeless. Then I noticed something weird. There was still power. I had been expecting complete darkness, but a few emergency exit signs still glowed faintly. I figured maybe they were on a separate circuit. Then I spotted the old ride control panel near the base of the carousel. Out of curiosity, I walked over and wiped the dust off the switches. They were all still labeled. Lights, music, start, stop. I hesitated. Then, on impulse, I flipped the switch labeled lights. To my shock, the bulbs on the carousel flickered to life. Not all of them, most were dead, but enough to bathe the ride in a sickly, flickering glow. Then, almost immediately, the music started. It was the same kind of music you'd expect from an old carousel, but warped, dragged out and off-key, like an old cassette tape that had been played too many times. I felt a chill creep up my spine, but I told myself it was just the age of the system. It had been sitting and used for years. Of course, it wouldn't sound right. Then I heard it. A voice, crackling over the old, dust-covered intercom mounted on one of the poles nearby. "You're not supposed to be here." I froze. The voice was distorted, robotic, like it had been pre-recorded. I turned, expecting to see a security guard with a flashlight coming toward me, but there was no one. The entrance was still empty. I flipped the switches back off and started making my way toward the way I came in. I wasn't about to stick around to see if someone was actually watching me, but when I reached the gate I had squeezed through earlier, it was locked. That didn't make sense. It had been open when I got here. I yanked at it, rattling the metal, but it wouldn't budge. I took a deep breath, trying to think. Maybe there was another way out. I needed a better view. I climbed onto the rusted remains of what used to be a food stand, trying to get a better look at the layout. From up here, I could see the whole abandoned section, the carousel, the bumper cars, the broken Ferris wheel in the distance. And something else. There were footprints in the dust. Fresh ones, leading away from the carousel. I hadn't seen them before. I hadn't made them. Then the intercom crackled again. "You never left." I felt my blood run cold. I didn't wait to find out what it meant. I jumped down and ran, searching for any way out. I don't even remember how I got out, only that I somehow found a loose panel in the fencing and squeezed through, scraping my arms in the process. I ran straight to my car and didn't stop until I was miles away. The next day, I told myself I had imagined it, that the power was glitchy, the voice was an automated security warning, and the footprints, well, maybe they had been there before and I just hadn't noticed. I was doing a good job convincing myself until I checked my phone. I had taken a few pictures while I was inside, mostly of the carousel, but in one of them, just barely visible in the dim light, was the figure of a man standing behind one of the wooden horses.